Do you ever feel like your ideas get lost in the shuffle? What's the secret of being heard and how can you capitalize on it? We're going to talk about the art of framing and how important it is to make sure that your ideas are heard. Welcome to How to Get What You Want. This podcast is for driven women ready to claim their goals and navigate their careers with clarity and confidence. Join me as we explore real stories, tools, and strategies to help you steer your career exactly where you want to go. Let's get started on helping you get what you want. Hey, welcome. I'm so glad you're here with me today. I'm Susie, and this is a really important topic. And I have to admit, I have a superpower around framing. I have seen so many professionals that are challenged with this. They have great ideas, but the key to presenting it is how you frame it in a way that the person that you're in front of values it, to get them engaged, to get them talking, to frame it so they understand that you can see it from not just your perspective, but you're framing it to really help to illustrate the value to the person in front of you, to the company, to what it means to them. This initial frame is about helping them see it from your perspective. How do you get them to lift out of wherever their head has been? We go from meeting to meeting, and having a really good frame allows that person in front of you to reorient themselves, to be in a place where you want them to be, to frame it in a way that you illustrate the value of the idea, but you're also considering what's important to them. Framing it is key. And there's a lot of research that shows in communication and persuasion that aligning the message with the audience's values dramatically increases their willingness to be a part of it. And when you frame it well, what happens is it invites curiosity. It helps the other person understand where you're going so they're clear, so they don't feel confused. They can see it from that view. And then if you're missing something, if you framed it right, they can ask more questions. So often we're so in our own head about what it is and what we want to tell somebody that we just kind of go at it from there. But when we frame it out and really kind of zoom out and think about what is important for me to set the stage, how can I help the person get out of their really busy schedule and lift up so that they can understand where I'm coming from and where I want to take them? We practice so much of what are the scenarios for me that are important and what's important to the other side. But showing all your homework is not necessary. You want to frame it in a way that really tells the story to them so that they can really get on board quickly. You don't need to tell them everything. You don't have to prove to them you know it all. You really want to frame it in a way that's going to make sense to them. And we get so like mired in all of the ideas and things and wanting to get to it that we don't always take the time to frame it well. We've talked so much about just in general about how in meetings you may throw out an idea and nobody pays any attention to it. And then all of a sudden, 5 minutes later, your exact thing that you said is made by somebody else and they get credit for the idea. Well, what happened there? Well, when people looked at those situations, they initially thought it was that person just trying to take advantage of the situation. But really, what it was that individual, the second one, saw that the idea got lost in the shuffle, understood that it was an important idea, and then brought it back up with a really strong frame. People paid attention. So, this idea of reframing is also really powerful in meetings, in reorienting, the room to how you want to see it. Framing is so powerful. It's like framing and reframing it throughout the conversation is a great strategy to reorient yourself to get focused on, okay, what do they need to know next? How do I need to reframe this for them so they understand and we're shifting to this next part of where I need them to go to say yes to the idea or understand it more? What questions are they asking? What do they still need to understand? And then how do I reframe that for them so that they continue to move along with you with the journey? I look at a conversation as the frame and then the reframe, and it's just this pathway of helping somebody understand the thread of where they are and where you need them to be. And they don't start in the exact same place as you. And that's why framing is so important. I like to think of this visual of they're sitting in this other seat across from you, and framing allows them to move over and sit side by side with you. It allows you to see it from the same frame, from the same orientation. And when you think about it that way, it really brings power to what you're trying to do. You're trying to help them understand the idea. So in that meeting, when you throw out an idea and they didn't pause on it and you still think it's worth bringing up again, how do you reframe it to make the room pay attention to what you're trying to show them? We often think that they don't understand us, but maybe they didn't understand the context of the idea that you were bringing forward. Giving them the whole picture and considering how you're going to frame it up from them helps you to take it from their perspective so that you can build a frame that's going to make sense to them. This is my favorite topic. It's so untapped, but so important to learn the art of it. And then it becomes really natural and automatic. I'll give you a couple stories to really illustrate my point. Hey, Susie here. Thought I'd pop in. I wanted to let you know I've been an executive coach for over a decade. I work with executives and they call me their silent partner because I help them increase their confidence when they're facing really difficult decisions. If you'd like to see if we're a good fit, head over to susietalmanchuck.com and fill out an application. I'd love to hear from you. Framing is my superpower. And I knew that when I was in my corporate job because even my colleagues would say, wow, you're really good at framing this up. I consider the politics of the situation, the people in the room, and then somebody will say, how do I position this? And then I just kind of come up with it. So I always knew it was my superpower. And then I met my friend Michael, and he is a business guy, a lawyer. So he negotiates for a living all the time. And it's my favorite story. If you've been following me at all, you've probably heard me talk about Michael because he talked to me about the power of the frame in a negotiation. And so the example he gave me was he was given a promotion by his boss from SVP to C-level. The thing about the offer was that it wasn't as much money as the person that he was replacing. So what Michael did was his boss, the CEO, came to him and said, I want to give you this promotion, more money, and this title, more responsibility. And Michael, knowing that he's a negotiator, the first thing he said was, I need time to think. He always just asked for more time, which is another best practice. Thank you, Michael, that you can leverage. So he went back and he really thought through, he understood why the person he was replacing made money because he made a lot of money over a 30-year career. Michael's new position was going to not only take over this person's role, but it was going to be expanded. And the offer that the CEO gave him was less than what his predecessor was making. And so Michael was very careful to frame it to the CEO. They all had the same data. They both knew that his predecessor had been there for more than 30 years. So over time, he had made all this money. All the facts of it were available to both. But what Michael did was, even though the facts, if you imagine, are on a whiteboard and they're all the data for the deal, when you put a square around it and think about the frame, what do you need to pull in of those facts to make your point? So Michael went back to his boss and said, here's his frame. I really appreciate this opportunity. I am so happy that you want to elevate me and give me this bigger role. But the one thing that bugs me is that my predecessor made more money than the offer you gave me. And you didn't respect him as much as you respect me. So I want you to give me at least what he was making. And because the CEO was the decision maker, Michael knew that he had to make an in-the-moment decision. And he said yes, because Michael had framed it very carefully. And Michael said, had I paused and said, I know that my predecessor had been working for over 30 years, and that's why those increases happened. That was the reason why he made that much, not because he was respected. If he would have pointed to that, that would have made it easy for his boss to go, that's right. It's not because I don't respect you. It's because he made more money over time. So Michael was careful to not frame it that way. They both had the same set of information, but Michael made it really easy for the CEO to say, okay, I do respect you. I will give you that same compensation. So that power of the frame in that situation illustrated to me how important it is to think about all of the factors in the deal, but then being very careful to think about what are you going to put in that square? What are you going to put in that frame that you want to show to the other side? It's such a great visual to think about taking all the facts and to frame, square in what's really important. I'm working with a client right now who he's a technologist, he's an engineer, and he had this great idea for the way to solve a problem from a technical perspective. And he presented it to senior leadership and he figured it would just be a really easy way of saying yes. He thought he'd get the funding. It wasn't even that much money. He did it twice, and in both meetings, different people, it just kind of didn't get any attention. Nobody said yes. Everybody kind of understood, but he didn't get the buy-in that he needed. And so I worked with him, and he also got some mentorship internally from somebody to help him think about the frame. So the advice he got internally was you need to frame it in a way that makes sense to those business leaders about what you're solving that's going to be impactful to them. So we worked on the frame together with that piece of additional value that we need to frame it up so that they saw it from a different lens, not from an engineering, the power of this solution, but how is this solution going to impact the business? And as soon as he reframed it in that way, he had a subset of both of those meetings and he represented it. He got so much support. He got so many people getting behind him because they could see it through a lens that made sense to them and frankly, that they could get behind. He was giving them the story that they would be able to tell to make sure that it continued to have momentum because people understood the value, the context to it. He gave them the frame that everybody could get around. And it was so interesting to me in those meetings beforehand because he was coming at it from such a different angle. Those people couldn't grasp it. It was almost like they didn't quite understand his whole solution until it was framed in a way that took it from their doorway. He helped them understand it from their perspective, which allowed them to understand it. I think sometimes when we don't frame things the best way, people don't even know the questions to ask because they don't have enough context to what you're saying, that they don't know how they fit in it. And that's why it's so important. You want to encourage people to ask questions. And if you're framing it in a way that doesn't make sense, they are too apprehensive. They don't want to look dumb. They don't want to ask a question that's not relevant to what you're saying. But if they don't understand the frame, you're not giving them the opportunity to think about it from their perspective and pull out a thread of information so that they can ask a question that's relevant to what your position is. Now, think about a situation that's coming up for you that you want to try to really frame with intention and use these tips as a guide to try it. And then I want to hear what were the things? What was success for you? What worked for you? How did you feel? What are the things that you're going to continue to refine? So the first one is understanding your audience. And whether it's somebody you know really well internally that you've worked with before, or it's somebody new, what can you know about them, the position they're in, the context to the request that you're asking for? And think about it from their perspective. Even consider where are they coming from before this meeting? Are they just going from meeting to meeting and they're busy? Are you meeting them somewhere and they might be rushed? Think about their perspective to the situation and what will really help them. Consider also their pain points, their priorities, what's important for them in the role that they're playing, and what do you want from them? And in your frame, you want to be really crystal clear about what is the goal for both of you? What is your outcome for the conversation? What you need to get from them along the way. So understanding their perspective is key because you can think about, if they're a data person, Then you start in your frame. I've thought about this conversation and this is my goal, but I want to start with and tell them where you're going to go. To start with the data to tell you the background and the research. I'm going to give you a little story of why this is so important and the value that it can bring. And then by the end of this conversation, I want to get to X, Y, Z. How does that sound to you? You get this buy-in to them. You help them understand where this conversation is going to go. That's the first one. And then you frame up exactly what you want them to understand based on what's important to them. So if they're a relationship person, that's what you want to consider in how you frame it to them. What's important to them in their role? How are you going to illustrate that this solution or you being involved in it is going to provide them value? Help them understand how it's going to help them. And it's based on what you know about them. Do as much research if you're meeting somebody for the first time, do as much research as you can with them. And the other thing I would say is have a few frames ready, but take a few moments to get to know them a little bit. Get that relationship equity, a little bit of investment in there before you frame it to them. And then that can help you decide which frame you're going to go to make sure that you're thinking of their interests and what's important to them. The second tip is really thinking about how to structure it, what language you're going to use. Make sure you're clear about that. And what is their language? What can you pull into the conversation that is very familiar to them? Using their language, helping them understand it from their perspective, and making sure that you are clear about what you're solving. Put that right up front. Help them understand where you're going, but what you've already solved. And even be able to say to them, I've really thought a lot about this conversation. I've thought through a couple things I wanted to share with you starting right away. Help me understand if these assumptions that I've made are true to what you want to see or in line with where you want to go. That shows this collaboration. It pulls them into the discussion right away. So if you need to have them a part of that, if you don't know all the answers to what's important to them, that helps to bring them in. So really structure your message, your frame for impact for them, and make sure it's not confusing to them so that they can really engage with you and help you move through and they feel like they're a part of the solution. People are 5 times more likely to be all in with what you're doing if they are a part of it. So you also wanna frame it in a way that they're coming alongside of you and that you're not just telling them that you are in a collaborative conversation. So be really thoughtful about the messaging, the structure, and the words that you use. And the final tip is just to practice and refine. Try this in low stakes situations. Be really intentional. I'm going to frame this up for both of us. You can even say that. Before we get started in this meeting, I'm just going to reframe what we need, what are our goals, how I want us all to look at this. It's allowing everybody to get into the same context. That's what you're doing. You're framing it so that everybody sees it from the same orientation. That creates this sense of feeling safe. And you're more likely to get people to be engaged in the conversation because you're helping them understand where you're coming from. It gives them license to ask more because you're shifting their orientation so they're not expected to understand everything. And it brings them through the doorway, through the frame to the next step. So practice and refine and make sure that you practice it so it sounds natural. A frame doesn't have to sound like a very rehearsed thing. Pull them in and say, this is my goal. I've thought about what's important to you, X, Y, and Z. My goal today is this. That's framing where you're going so that they feel a part of the conversation. So the tips are understand your audience, use their language, think about how you're going to frame it in a way that makes sense to them. 2 is really structuring your message with impact. How are you going to use really concise language, but easy for them to understand so they can ask questions and be a part of it? And then use your low stakes situations, your everyday situations to practice framing and reframing as you're going in a conversation, even thinking about ooh, they're not quite understanding where I'm going with this. Let me reframe it for them so that I can get them on the same page. So it's a way to get your mindset to consider and be intentional about how are you going to reframe along the way to keep them on the right path. Oh, I can't wait to hear how you use one of these tips this week. As you know, framing is my superpower, but I also believe it can be yours as well. You just have to practice and see it. Think about how you're gonna frame, but in those moments, like I said, how are you reorienting the person in front of you, reframing their perspective so they continue to see it from the view you want them to. So what the reflective question I wanna ask you is, what idea have I been hesitant to share because I wasn't sure how to present it? And how will I reframe it so it resonates and it can move through and gain traction? So what is that for you? What idea just feels inhibiting you to move forward? And how can you frame it in a way that will be impactful to the person that you're sitting in front of? Who do you need to talk? Maybe that gets in our way sometimes too. Who do you need to talk to about this? Who is the decision maker around this and what's important to them? Framing is really powerful and it actually helps you to get really clear about how you are positioning this. Why is it important? When you consider your frame, you're making yourself go through the exercise of proving that to whoever's sitting in front of you. And you can see how that can become such a useful tool as you go up in the organization. It's expected that you can make these refinements in real time. You can say, oh, this person's getting frustrated, they're getting aggravated. I need to reframe this because they're not understanding. Sometimes the emotions in the other side are coming from a point of not being clear, not understanding where you're going. I've seen that so many times when I've coached people. When they lose somebody, they get emotional, and what happens is then they're focused on how they want to move forward and not what's important, the topic of discussion or what's important to you. They focus on their own interests. So identifying those moments when you need to reframe so that you can get the buy-in, so that you can help get them clarity, because so many times people get frustrated or they get lost or they're unable to say yes because the person on the other side has not been clear on how they frame what their ask is, and the other person's just confused. And they're not gonna say, "Be clearer and tell me because I'm not understanding." They're just gonna get frustrated and just say no. That's the easiest way that they can get out of that situation. So framing is very important, and it's a skill that as we go up in an organization, it's more and more critical and so important to be able to do in a moment like that. So your ideas need to be heard and respected. You need to really think about how do you frame those so that the person on the other side of the table understands and can take action to help you get what you need. I'm so happy that you made the choice to be here. I share more insights in my newsletter I send out every week. If you want to learn more about how to adopt a negotiator mindset, head over to negotiationlove.com and sign up there. I'm glad you made the time because negotiation is more than a skill, it's a mindset. Until next time.